The lone plane hung low on the horizon, and by the time it was spotted, it was too late. It was just after 9 a.m. on the morning of Sunday, October 26, 1940, and the RMS Empress of Britain, now serving as a troop ship, was sailing some 60 miles off the northwest coast of Ireland. The largest passenger liner ever built for the Canadian Pacific Line plowed ahead at 22 knots, zigzagging to avoid U-boats. At first, the 4-engine plane was thought to be friendly, but when it abruptly changed course and headed directly for the liner, Captain Sapsworth knew that it was an enemy bomber. The crew sprang into action, ready to defend their ship, but their efforts would be in vain. In just a few hours, the burning hull of the doomed liner would slip beneath the waves. After completing the monumental task of building the Canadian Transcontinental Railroad in 1885, the Canadian Pacific Railway turned its attention to the sea. In 1887, under the leadership of Sir William Cornelius Van Horn, the company chartered 3 vessels from the Cunard Line with the intention of establishing a trans-Pacific passenger service between Vancouver, British Columbia, and Asia. 3 years later, after the experiment proved profitable, the company approved plans to move forward with a liner of their own, and in 1891 the Canadian Pacific Steamship Company was established. The RMS Empress of China, Empress of India, and Empress of Japan entered service that same year, starting off the naming convention that the line would adopt for most of their passenger liners. The intention was to provide an uninterrupted route for citizens of the United Kingdom between England and the Far East, by providing a transcontinental railroad that would take passengers from Quebec to Vancouver, where they would then board liners that serviced ports in Japan, China, Hong Kong, Manila, and Honolulu. Canadian Pacific was able to reach a deal with the British government to deliver mail from Britain to Hong Kong, further subsidizing the venture. Over the next several years, the company gradually expanded its fleet of passenger liners and would acquire both the Beaver Line and the successful Allen Line. They would also begin offering transatlantic service between England and Quebec, completing the uninterrupted chain from the United Kingdom to the Far East. In 1914, the Canadian Pacific Line's 14,000-ton RMS Empress of Ireland collided with a Norwegian collier and sank in just 14 minutes on the St. Lawrence River. It was the worst peacetime maritime disaster in Canadian history, killing 1,012 people. But the disaster was quickly overshadowed by the outbreak of World War I. The Canadian Pacific Line played a major role in the United Kingdom's war effort, with many of their ships requisitioned to service troop carriers, armed merchantmen, and other wartime purposes. The conflict exerted a heavy toll on the shipping line, with a total of 18 vessels lost over the course of the war. In the years that followed, the line would embark on an ambitious campaign to both replace the lost ships, but also modernize their vast fleet. In an effort to continue the line's dominance over the Canadian shipping trade, these new liners would be faster, larger, and far more luxurious than anything the company had shown the world.
The next day the king said, "What do you mean by launching a ship?" He said, "That's a woman's job, not a man's."
The post-war years saw a renewed sense of optimism in Canada as the memory of World War I faded and economic conditions began to improve, making Canadian waters attractive to shipping lines. As the 1920s wore on, the Canadian Pacific Line faced increased competition from the rival Cunard Line, which ordered 6 popular new ships, known as the A-class liners, to service the St. Lawrence route. The White Star Line and the Donaldson Line also garnered a following that threatened to eat into Canadian Pacific's market share. Edward W. Beatty, president of the company at the time, recognized that they had to earn a loyal following. He sought to appeal to travelers through an ambitious advertising campaign that showcased jaw-dropping luxury liners and convenient travel options. To turn this ambition into reality, a new set of liners were constructed, culminating in the largest, fastest, and most luxurious liner the company would ever build. On November 28, 1928, the first plates of hull number 730 were laid down at John Brown & Company shipyard in Clydebank. The new liner would cost £2,130,723 to build. She was designed to serve 2 roles: the England to Canada route, and during the winter months when the St. Lawrence froze over, she would operate as an all first-class luxury cruise ship. She was one of the first major ships built with this dual purpose in mind. To accommodate her more northerly route, which put her in icier waters, the new liner was ordered with a double-thick steel plating at her stem. Among her safety features, she was equipped with powerful floodlights that could illuminate her massive funnels during an emergency, creating a beacon that could be spotted from 30 miles away by sea and 50 miles away by air. She was powered by 8 Yarrow boilers and 1 Johnson boiler that fed 12 Parsons steam turbines, driving 4 4-bladed manganese bronze propellers. For cruising, 2 engines were shut down, and she was operated with just her 2 inboard propellers, reducing her fuel consumption by 1/3, but maintaining an impressively efficient 22.5 knot service speed. During transatlantic crossings, her full power was employed in order to achieve a service speed of 26 knots. She was launched on June 11, 1930. The ceremony garnered considerable attention from the public, as it was the first to be broadcast across the world by the British Broadcasting Corporation. The broadcast was carried by 16 stations in Canada and more than 60 stations in the United States, as well as several other stations across the world. And in a bit of a strange move, the new liner was christened by the Prince of Wales, the future King Edward VIII, who would abdicate the throne only a few years later. He was selected both because he held the title of Master of the Merchant Navy and because at the time he was wildly popular with the public, which helped boost the profile of the event.
I named this ship Empress of Britain, and may success always attend her and those who sail it. Are you ready right so quickly?
Yes, right away.
Despite uncertain economic times, over the next year, the RMS Empress of Britain would be fitted out. She would come in at 42,348 tons with a length of 760 feet and a beam of 97.8 feet. On transatlantic crossings, she was configured to carry 465 first-class passengers, 260 tourist-class passengers, and 470 third-class passengers, along with a crew of 714. On cruises, she would be converted to an all first-class configuration of just 700 passengers. She sported a somewhat bulky profile with a cruiser stern, an impressive white paint scheme, and 3 massive 68-foot tall funnels, 2 of which served as conventional uptakes, while the third served as ventilation and also housed her 21-tube radio broadcasting equipment. Though her size fell short of the largest liners serving the New York routes, she would be the largest liner dedicated to servicing Canada. While her size and speed were impressive, her lavish Art Deco interiors were what really put the Empress in a class of her own. Canadian Pacific was well aware that they were constructing a liner that had to appeal to an extremely wealthy passenger base. Minor inconveniences that could be overlooked on a 5-day voyage would be hard to ignore on a 4-month-long world cruise. That meant that an exceptional level of care and detail had to be put into her accommodations. £250,000 were allocated to decorating and furnishing her public rooms. 5 of England's best-known artists were commissioned to design these spaces. When compared to other liners constructed during this time period, the Empress of Britain's interiors took a somewhat conservative approach, but they offered distinct flares of modern Art Deco style, which was hugely popular at the time. The intention was to create spaces that wouldn't feel oppressive or overwhelming, and instead made passengers feel comfortable and at home during a long voyage. The majority of her first-class public rooms were situated on her lounge deck, starting with the 70 by 40 foot Empress Room, designed by famed English painter Sir John Lavery. He chose a color scheme of coral pink, blue, and silver. The ballroom featured a parquet floor of Austrian oak, a mirrored wall, a stage with a beige Steinway grand piano, and silver light standards, topped with pink ostrich plumes. The room was centered with a dome painted with planets and star constellations. There was also a projection booth that allowed conversion into a movie theater. The spaciousness of her first-class public rooms was accentuated by 2 corridors, known as the Mall, that led from the Empress Room to her foyer and grand staircase. Decorated with lime oak walls and illuminated with crystal pendants set in recessed panels, the room offered an array of settees, easy chairs, and writing tables, as well as a small shop counter. The space gave an impressive Art Deco vibe. Her grand staircase was adorned with a mural by Maurice Greifenhagen, depicting the arrival of Samuel de Champlain and his wife Helen Boulet at Quebec in 1610. Further aft, there was a comfortable English-style writing room, and the whimsical Knickerbocker Bar, which was decorated by cartoonist W. Heath Robinson. These opened up to the large 83 by 70 foot Mayfair Lounge. This impressive central space was decorated by Sir Charles Elam, who selected a Renaissance style with rich walnut paneling embellished with silver. The room was furnished with plush sofas and armchairs in subdued colors with woven Persian rugs in a 16th century Polish design. The room was topped by an amber glass dome with a stylized golden sun at the center. And in a nod to the Empress's Canadian owners, the dome's surrounding frieze was decorated with snowshoes, canoe paddles, and of course maple leaves. Next, there was a small Spanish-style card room that separated the Mayfair Lounge from the Cafe Lounge, which was located at the aft end of the deck. This space served as a smoking room and was informally intended only for men. But despite the lounge only having a men's restroom, women often enjoyed time in the space as well, which was decorated by book illustrator Edmond Delac. He selected a Chinese fretwork theme. The space featured ash gray paneling and a pale gold leaf ceiling. Tables and chairs were lacquered in vermilion and ebony and followed an angular design that was repeated through much of the room's fixtures. The space was also flanked by tall red Chinese vases. The dining saloon was the final grand first-class space. It was located on D-deck and called the Salle Jacques Cartier, named for the French explorer. This room was decorated by famed British painter Frank Brangan. It stretched 120 feet long and spanned the full width of the ship. The central well spanned 2 decks and featured murals depicting Jacques Cartier as he mapped the St. Lawrence River. The room's walls were a light oak, and the ceiling consisted of panels divided by large oak beams and light fixtures with the letters CP hidden in their designs. Brangan also created the geometric pattern in the rubber flooring and designed the light oak furnishings. The centerpiece of the room was a tall octagonal oak buffet with gold mirrors and lighting. Overall, the room is striking for its contemporary feel and Art Deco flair. The public spaces found on the Empress of Britain were impressively grand and detailed. The variety of styles showed the freedom given to the artists commissioned for their designs. Her first-class accommodations, called apartments by Canadian Pacific, were equally well appointed. Every stateroom was an outside cabin, and every single one featured at least one porthole. 3 quarters had ensuite bathrooms with either a tub or a shower. Most were configured to accommodate 2 passengers, but 69 were designed as single-bed cabins. Furnishings, bedding, and carpet all featured a variety of circular, angular, linear, and floral patterns. All beams, girders, and pipes were hidden from view with a massive array of wood finishings, including walnut, ash, sycamore, mahogany, birch, oak, maple, black beam, peroba, satinwood, pearwood, sapele, zebrano, angoum, macassar ebony, locust, and avidar. Holy crap. The ship's tourist and third-class accommodations offered a bit more restraint, but were still comfortable and stylish. Canadian Pacific took great pride in highlighting that luxury wasn't just reserved for those who held a first-class ticket. The Empress of Britain sailed her maiden voyage between Southampton and Quebec on May 27, 1931. She was captained by R.G. Latta, a veteran of the Canadian Pacific Line who joined the company as a fourth officer in 1904. Passengers on her maiden voyage included Douglas Fairbanks and his wife Mary Pickford. She arrived in Quebec to an estimated crowd of over 100,000 spectators eager to catch a glimpse of the widely publicized voyage. She earned rave reviews from both the press and her passengers. After her maiden voyage, she completed 16 Atlantic crossings. Unfortunately, her grandeur and size proved a poor match for the tough economic conditions of the time, and these voyages remained far below capacity. Despite these challenges, she still managed to garner a profit of $396,158 in her first season. In June 1931, she broke the record for the fastest crossing on the Belle Isle route at 4 days, 12 hours, and 33 minutes. A time technically faster than the Europa, the blue ribbon holder at the time. But unfortunately, the more northern route didn't qualify her for the prize. When asked about the achievement, Captain Latta responded by saying, "There is no need for me to say anything. The Empress has said it for herself." On November 27, 1931, with her two outer propellers removed and her aft engine room shut down to accommodate her more efficient cruising configuration, the Empress of Britain arrived in New York to take on passengers for her first world cruise. She departed on December 3, 1931 with 332 passengers for a 128-day voyage that wouldn't return to New York until April 10, 1932. She would visit ports all over the world, including stops in Japan, China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Bombay, Jerusalem, Cairo, Athens, Naples, Monaco, and Algiers, among many others. Her shore excursions were intricately planned by a staff of 14 attendants, headed by cruise director Edward Henderson. Passengers were issued hand-drawn calendars of events both on board and on shore, highlighting local attractions and activities. Her first cruise was considered a success both financially and by passengers, which included American heiress Barbara Hutton, heir to the $50 million Woolworth fortune. Another passenger was a Scottish woman named Marion F. Bertie, who long dreamed of taking a world cruise and kept a detailed diary of the 4-month voyage. She wrote of her daily routines, the food, tours of the bridge, dolphin sightings, and many of the shore excursions. She concluded her entries with the following passage: "My Empress, oh my Empress, how I love you. On your long, lonely voyages, my thoughts will be with you. On sunny mornings and on gray, stormy days, you will know that in spirit I am tramping up and down your decks. But nothing will ever really be gray again, for the backward memories will remain forever, like a golden crimson sunset." The Empress of Britain went on to maintain a similar schedule every year until 1939, with round-trip transatlantic voyages from spring to fall and a world cruise in the winter. Throughout her career, despite aggressive advertising by Canadian Pacific, like many of her contemporaries, she struggled to attract passengers. But her speed allowed her to maintain her lucrative mail contracts, helping with the bottom line. Out of the 75 passenger ships that sailed the North Atlantic in 1934, the Empress of Britain ranked 15th in passenger numbers, which was respectable, but it didn't change the fact that she was often less than half full. The Empress was widely loved, but it was thought that Quebec was still considered a remote port for many travelers, despite attempts to draw Americans in with the pitch that it was a shorter journey to the American Midwest than through New York. In 1935, the Empress of Britain collided with a British cargo ship in heavy fog on the St. Lawrence River. While the Empress was largely unharmed, the other ship was heavily damaged, killing 3 of her 8 crew members. The Empress remained on the scene for 5 hours to assist with the rescue, before resuming her voyage to Southampton, where her damage was repaired in just 22 hours. Passenger numbers on her transatlantic voyages began to pick up in the late 1930s, even surpassing 1,000 passengers on some voyages in 1937, which proved to be a good year for the ship. But as the clouds of war gathered over Europe, travelers grew wary of crossing the Atlantic. She took her final world cruise in 1939. China and Japan were removed from the itinerary due to the growing hostilities in the region. This was the first cruise captained by Charles H. Sapsworth, a quiet Scottish man who managed a nautical school before joining Canadian Pacific in 1912 as a second officer. In the summer of 1939, the Empress of Britain was chartered to carry King George VI and Queen Elizabeth from Halifax to Southampton at the conclusion of their Canadian tour. The Empress of Britain sailed her final westbound crossing of 1939 on September 2nd. Germany had already crossed the Polish border, and it was uncertain whether the British Admiralty would allow her to sail, but at the last minute, permission was granted. She sailed well over capacity, loaded with American, Canadian, and Australian citizens looking to flee Europe before the inevitable declaration of war. Cots were set up in public rooms, and Captain Sapsworth ordered the ship's windows painted black to avoid giving away their position during the night. Several passengers slept fully dressed, anxious that the ship would come under attack at any moment. On Sunday, September 3rd, just the second day of the crossing, they received the inevitable news that war was officially declared between Britain and Germany. After the announcement, radios were shut off. The ship sailed a zigzag course to evade any waiting U-boat. One day during luncheon, she took a sudden and extreme heavy list, sending passengers and furniture sliding across the floor, injuring a few. At the time, she was passing through heavy fog and wasn't using her whistle in fear of giving away her position. Suddenly, a tanker was spotted dead ahead, and the helm was ordered hard over to avoid a collision, sending the ship into momentary chaos. But the quick action avoided a collision. The jarring incident only added to the already tense mood on board. But finally, the Empress of Britain arrived in Quebec on September 8, 1939, where she would disembark her anxious passengers and await her inevitable wartime orders. She was painted war grey, and on November 25th, she was requisitioned by the British Ministry of War Transport to be used as a troop ship. For the time being, she maintained her peacetime configuration and completed 4 transatlantic trips carrying troops from Canada to England. She would also complete voyages to Wellington, New Zealand, and Cape Town, South Africa, but her wartime service wouldn't last long. Death came suddenly for the Empress of Britain as she sailed from Cape Town to England, carrying 224 military personnel and civilians, along with a crew of 419. Just after 9 a.m. on the morning of October 26, 1940, while she was sailing unescorted some 60 miles off the northwest coast of Ireland, a lone plane was spotted on the horizon. At first, the 4-engine plane was thought to be friendly, but when it abruptly changed course, heading directly for the liner, Captain Sapsworth knew that it was an enemy bomber. The German Focke-Wulf FW-200C Condor long-range bomber, commanded by Oberlieutenant Bernard Jope, approached from the stern. They strafed the liner 3 times and landed direct hits with 2 of their 550-pound bombs, one of which penetrated the Mayfair lounge, igniting a fierce fire that quickly filled the ship with thick black smoke. On the bridge, Captain Sapsworth was uninjured, but Chief Officer Henry Davies was wounded in the attack. The thick smoke forced those working in the engine room to don gas masks. As the inferno raged, Captain Sapsworth assessed the ship's damage. Much of the firefighting equipment was destroyed in the attack, and communication to the aft section of the ship had been severed. Reluctantly, the captain ordered the engine stopped and gave the order to issue an SOS and abandon the ship about 30 minutes after the plane was first spotted. The situation on board was chaotic. Passengers were ordered to remain below deck until the attack had subsided, and many weren't sure when it was safe to head up. While the engines were shut off, the great ship had yet to come to a full stop. But as the fire spread amidship, it was essential to evacuate as quickly as possible before fire overtook the lifeboats. Some 300 people assembled on the forward A deck, separated from the lifeboats by the fire. Others assembled in the stern, dangerously close to the ship's munitions, which could explode at any moment. The crew had to think fast. A plan was devised to lower the lifeboats with just crew in order to get them away from the fire and then row them to the bow and the stern, where passengers could descend on rope ladders. Several on board acted heroically. Able seaman James McKeever, who suffered a deep gash in his head from the first bombing, saw a young mother and baby waiting to board the lifeboat. Recognizing that she couldn't get down the ladder with a baby on her own, McKeever wrapped the 11-month-old to his body and descended 60 feet into the lifeboat, nearly passing out from his wound on the way down. Second steward Arthur Street had gotten away from the ship safely, but noticed some sailors still on deck, surrounded by flames, struggling to lower a lifeboat. Street climbed back on board and helped lower the boat, saving the 30 men from the rapidly advancing fire. Captain Sapsworth remained on the burning bridge until the flames grew too intense and he was forced to leave the ship. An act that later drew criticism as there were still a handful of passengers awaiting rescue on the forecastle at the time. The final survivors left the Empress of Britain approximately 6 hours after the attack. 45 people died in the incident, 25 of them crewmen. It's presumed most were killed in the initial attack. The survivors were picked up by the Polish destroyer Berza and the Royal Navy destroyer Echo, which both arrived on the scene at around 4:30 that afternoon, followed shortly after by the trawlers Cape Agona, Drangy, and Patener, which rescued the remaining survivors from the water. While the Empress was engulfed in flames, her hull remained intact, with no immediate danger of sinking. A salvage operation began almost immediately on Sunday, October 27th, when tugs arrived on the scene and secured ropes to the stricken liner with the intention of towing her to port at a speed of around 4 knots. They were escorted by destroyers HMS Broke and Sardonyx, with additional cover from short Sunderland flying boats during the day. But unknown to the salvage operation, the German submarine U-32, commanded by Hans Jenisch, received word of the attack by radio and soon arrived on the scene. Under the cover of night, as the destroyers escorting the salvage operation zigzagged ahead, U-32 placed herself between them and the stricken liner. She fired 2 torpedoes. The first misfired, but the second scored a direct hit, causing a massive explosion. At first, the salvage crew thought that the blast was caused by the fire reaching the Empress's fuel tanks, but they quickly realized what was happening when a third torpedo struck the liner. The tow ropes were severed as the liner rapidly took on water and immediately began listing to port. Within just 10 minutes, she capsized, and at 2:05 on the morning of Monday, October 28, 1940, the Empress of Britain, the greatest Canadian Pacific liner ever built, slipped beneath the waves of the North Atlantic. The RMS Empress of Britain is often forgotten, overshadowed by the larger and more revered liners that serviced the New York routes. She was the largest liner lost in the Second World War, and the largest ship ever sunk by a U-boat. Her tragically short career seems to have largely removed her from the current consciousness. She was stunningly beautiful, but perhaps a poor match for the time that she sailed. But what she offered to passengers who got a chance to sail on one of her round-the-world voyages was something completely unrivaled then and now. A fantasy 4-month escape that shielded a lucky few from the creeping unease of the pre-war years. In the words of Marion F. Birdie, "I shall always be tremendously glad that I came. During all the years I have waited and worked towards it, I never thought it would be so much better worthwhile than anticipated. I was almost driven to wonder whether heaven could offer more." Thank you so much for watching. If you want more videos like this one, help out the channel with a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd like to give a special shout out to my supporters on Patreon and my channel members. Their support helps make in-depth, independently produced videos like this one possible. Alright crew, that's all I've got. Until the next one, be nice to people.